Well, Chinese is, to me, absolutely the most wonderful language in the world. I don't know why I feel that way, but I do, and I did from the beginning. It was fascinating. I'm a visual person, so I like what the characters look like and what they mean as pictograms, and the fact that just as we write in English, which to me is very boring when you write English or Sanskrit without the character. If you have the Sanskrit, it's beautiful. If you just have the romanizations, it's such a loss. So, and I learned by the master, you know, he has a very formal voice when he lectures the sutras, and when he first speaks, he speaks very slowly. It took a long time to read the passage, so I began to realize shortly after I came, I could follow. So my finger followed like a little kid, you know, the ru, and then the shi, and then the wo, and the one, and I could do some of it. And then the next step in that was, I began to recognize some of the simpler characters. Even when he wasn't reading them, I could find them on the page. And the impetus was he wouldn't speak to us in English. And when he'd lecture about 20 minutes, and then there would be a translation. And during that 20 minutes, he had a great sense of humor, so people would be laughing all the time. And then the translation would come, Alan will support me in this, and it'd be 5 minutes long and nothing funny. So I realized I was missing things, and that's exactly what he wanted us to realize. You know, he'd sit there and talk in Chinese, and you'd be dying to know, because if you met someone like Shifu, he was so wise that, you know, I remember one time a guy came in and talked Mandarin from off the street. He was a businessman, a very nice person, but a businessman, and his Mandarin compared to Shifu's Mandarin, I suddenly realized, oh, Mandarin doesn't always sound like it does when Shifu speaks it. It can be just plain old business or whatever. And I realized then how fortunate we were to be able to hear the level of eloquence that the master put into speaking the language, even just casually talking to us. So for me, again, wanting to know the language was primary, and I didn't want anything with the romanization. I wanted to learn the characters and their meanings. How did he teach it? He had, even back at the Buddhist lecture hall, he had the men and women who knew Chinese, who were our translators for the sutras, give reviews the next morning. So we'd come in about 7:30 or 8 from a bus ride, and we'd sit down, and that person would have taken Shifu's lecture from the night before, picked out the important technical terms or idioms or difficult passages, and we would go over those. And we were also allowed to ask questions, so we could supplement whatever he had prepared. So we were getting a good review all along. Most of it we were self-taught and self-motivated in the beginning. Unless there were people who had come in from, some of the people who came in the first session were language experts and had degrees in language. And that was very fortunate for those of us who didn't. But for instance, in my case, I was self-motivated. I would spend a lot of time looking at the characters, learning to write the characters, and learning as much as I could in Chinese about what was going on. I remember the master giving us Great Master Oi's entire, it isn't in this room, his entire works, Great Master Oi's entire works is a bunch of volumes about like that. I suppose now they're all digital and it's, you know, this much, but it was books with words. And I didn't know anything. That was back at the Buddhist lecture hall. And I thought, whenever will I be able to do that? But I did. I learned classical commentaries, primarily Tang Dynasty, and they differed, you know. Ming, Song would have different language than Tong, and I did mostly Tong because that was the golden age and there were some good commentators. But I was self-motivated, and I think some of the others who got deeply into the language were. I just kept looking, kept trying to figure it out. In the old days, we translated together to begin with, much as they're doing now. So there's sort of a revival of team translation that's happened in the last, say, 6-7 years. Before that, for many decades, 2 or 3 decades, we were mostly following a sequential pattern. You translate it, I review it, she edits it, he certifies it. And what's happening now is more a simultaneous process where the team works together and talks over the words that might be the translated words, and you come up with a translation that's pretty close to being then just edited and certified. In the beginning, we tried that. The master, I think, preferred if we would have done it as a team. And we were new Sangha. There were 5 of us, 3 men and 2 women. And our day was supposed to be come to the monastery and translate 8 to 5. And we couldn't do it. We couldn't get along. We argued. We were stubborn about our own opinion. We had looked up the terms and decided what it ought to be, and didn't want to compromise, didn't want to listen to other people. And we all sat in the Buddhist lecture hall, that was early, around a big table. And one day, and the master was down the hall in his room, I'm sure he could hear us arguing. But one day the picture of Venerable Master Hsuan fell off the wall, whoomp, and broke. The glass broke and it scattered all over. And of course the master walked out when he heard the big crash and told us that we could change now and we could translate sequentially instead of simultaneously because we couldn't do it. And I guess the Venerable Hsuan had enough. So then we each picked our sutra we wanted, and we began to translate sequentially. And there's some faults there too. When you translate sequentially, then you're going to be, say I'm the rough draft translator translating from Chinese to English. Then I am in a sequential process. You give over your translation to the person who's going to do a bilingual review. They're going to look at the Chinese and the English again and fix the places they think need fixed. And then that manuscript is going to go on to an editor of the target language, in this case English. So an English editor covers it. And then finally the person who's certified in those days was the master. He had certain secretaries, if you will, mostly among the lay people, who would help him certify a translation. We kind of fudged it a little because we would get the translation back. For instance, if I was a translator, then I would get it back after the reviewer was finished and I get to take a look at, which was good education, but also I have been the reviewer before and handed back the manuscript to the translator, and I reviewed in pencil and watched the translator go through and erase all my corrections. So that is to an extreme. You shouldn't totally reject what people are offering. On the other hand, I translated something and it was given to, we used to have professors live here, professors from Taiwan. And this one was well known for his translation skills. So the master gave him the option to review, and I kept everything he did. And that didn't work either, trust me, because he didn't get it all. And I had gotten it in many cases, and so the translation got changed in ways that were regrettable later. So there had to be a balance between, I only want to use the words I used in my translation, I'm going to erase all of yours if you comment on me, to, you know, okay, I'm a humble translator, you can change my translation any way you want, they're both extreme. There has to be a middle ground where we accept and compromise. And I think maybe in simultaneous translating where everybody's working together, that may happen more easily. He gave us some rules to follow. He said we shouldn't be attached to our own translation, that we shouldn't assume our translation was the best one. We shouldn't obstruct other people from translating or getting published their translations because they might not be as good as ours, or at least we thought so. We shouldn't be translating in order to get name or fame. We should ask knowledgeable people in Buddhism. He said sages, elders, to certify our translations so that when they were finally published, they could be trusted. They were as close as possible to rendering whatever language we were using into the target language that came out. And he would then have us edit those so the target language was fluid and communicable. He set up 4 committees, and we never hired people. None of BTTS is paid. These days, sometimes we send out for certain tasks to be done, mostly formatting and publishing. But the hardcore translation, bilingual review, English or whatever target language editing, and finally certification are done by people who are entirely volunteer. You probably won't find that, I'm sure you don't find that anywhere in the world. And we've maintained it at least this much, up to this time. So that means the people that are working really care. They're taking their time and energy to turn a text from one language into another. And so their motive and their impetus isn't fame, isn't money, isn't satisfying their own ego, if we follow those rules that he set up.
今天呢，这我也不怕泄露天机，泄露天机呀，这也就泄露了。我到美国去弘扬佛法，那么为什么有这么多美国人来出家？我实实在在的告诉你，美国这些个出家人不是现在出家的，这是在过去呀，在汉朝的时候就出家了，在隋晋这个每一代呀都有出家的。那么在这个唐朝的时候也最多，好像唐玄奘翻译经典那时候，这一般人呢也都在那儿参加这个一场的工作的。那么有唐朝、宋朝、元朝、唐宋元明清，每一个朝代里头都有。这些个出家的人都是以前在中国做过出家人并且多数是做过我的徒弟。我老老实实告诉你你们信不信那就随你们了那么当时就觉得这个经典呢应该把它翻译成英文。那么翻译成英文呢必须要懂得外国的文字。那么当时也就大家来研究，共同研究这个问题怎么办呢？那么有的这个弟子就是当时我曾经发一个这么不自量的一个愿我说将来我要到外国去弘法，弘扬佛法。那么就有一些个徒弟也都发愿了。这个说我先到升到那国家去所以对外国的语言一定会很这个流利了那么等师父到那地方弘扬佛法，我们大家这个都可以来这个拥护这个道场。因为这样子，所以 把我这个不认字的人呢也就相信呢这些个徒弟的话，所以呢就也不自量力，自己不会英文，现在跑到美国去讲经说法讲经说法。那么果然这些个人呢以前发愿要到这个外国去来帮着弘扬佛法，那么现在呀都源源而来。你不信，你如果不信，你看看呢这些个出家人的面孔都有多少中国的样子都有多少中国的这个气在里头，这个血在里头如果人呢自己没有得到许命通，就不知道这个前因后果的事情。那么现在我是告诉你们这个大概的情形，所以有这么多的这个外国人来出家，就是这个因缘。他们为什么现在翻译英文呢？什么？不过比一个时代此一个时代不同，在唐朝翻译经典有800多，有的3000多在一起翻译。现在呢，科学时代，机器做工都用机器，机械化，所以那个翻译经典也不需要那么多人，但是人多也不是不好，将来一天比一天就会人多的。现在是一个开始，那么开始俺们这个愿力就是要把这个所有的佛经都翻译成英文这么多年西方没有真正的出家人，为什么呢？就因为佛经没有翻译成英文，没有翻译成英文，西方人就不容易明白佛法这是一个最大的问题。现在呢不是说用原子弹呢掉到那个人口稠密的地方去解决这个问题。现在我们就用这个佛经把它放到那个人口稠密的地方，解决这个现在当前这个危险的问题。